Welcome to Part 5 of Blessed Seraphim Rose's article, in defense of Father Dimitry Dudko. The obvious sincerity of Father Dimitry Dudko can only be judged by a loving, struggling, Christian heart. If such a truthful man as Father Dimitry can be mistrusted, as was Solzhenitsyn before him, then where can trust be placed in our cold-hearted world? One will begin to mistrust everyone around oneself, and end by closing oneself in a small group of reliable people, one of whom is probably a KGB agent. The Orthodox answer to this unhealthy outlook can only be based on a believing Christian heart, which may sometimes be mistaken, but with God's grace, will not be led entirely astray. The writings of Father Dimitry before his confession are of such a character that one cannot reasonably doubt their sincerity. They speak directly to the believing heart as do few other Orthodox writings of our times. Whatever may become of Father Dimitry now, these writings will remain, despite his forced disowning of them, part of the important Orthodox literature of our century. Father Dimitry himself gives an answer to this air of suspicion that has become so widespread now in the Orthodox world. Is it not time for us to learn to understand each other, to help each other, to rejoice for each other? Brethren, Russia is perishing, the whole world is perishing, hiding itself behind a false prosperity, and we hinder each other from doing the work of God. 4. Is Father Dimitry an ecumenist and a heretic? A final criticism of Father Dimitry, made by some would-be zealots of Orthodoxy in the West, is that he is an ecumenist and thus is literally a heretic. This accusation is made on one of two grounds. A. He belongs to the Moscow Patriarchate, which since 1970 has allowed Holy Communion to be given to Roman Catholics and Old Believers in Russia, and thus is a heretical organization, all of whose members are likewise heretics. B. In some of his writings and sermons, Father Dimitry praises ecumenism, and he does not condemn heterodox Christians and does not state explicitly that Orthodoxy alone is the Church of Christ. The first of these accusations may be dealt with briefly. The decision of the Moscow Patriarchate to give Holy Communion to the non-Orthodox, under certain restricted conditions, is surely an anti-canonical act and one, perhaps, that is even heretical, if those promulgating it actually believe that Roman Catholics can be part of the Orthodox Church. As such, it was condemned by the Sobor of Bishops of the Russian Church outside of Russia shortly after its promulgation. But this canonical disorder does not as such constitute a heresy that deprives all members of the given Church of the grace of God. The same bishops of the Russian Church outside of Russia who condemned this act in 1971, in their Sobor of 1976 addressed the priests of the Moscow Patriarchate as genuine Orthodox pastors, giving them the greeting reserved only for Orthodox priests who have God's grace. Christ is in our midst. The Moscow Patriarchate has worse faults than this, the chief of which is Sergianism itself, the subjection of the Church to dictation by atheists, but the Free Russian Church has never condemned it as heretical. Father Dimitry cannot be called a heretic on this basis, and those who attempt to do so find themselves at variance with the bishops of the Russian Church outside of Russia. As for the second accusation, even friends of Father Dimitry have to admit that in his earlier writings he sometimes used the word ecumenism as a word of praise. This was obviously done in ignorance of what the ecumenical movement actually is, and any sympathetic Orthodox Christian in the West can readily overlook this fault, as did Protopresbyter Michael Pomazansky in his review of Our Hope in Orthodox Russia in 1976. As long as Father Dimitry is not teaching the actual heresy of the ecumenical superchurch. This brings us to a fundamental question of definition: what is ecumenism? Some would-be zealots of Orthodoxy use the term in entirely too imprecise a fashion, as though the very use of the term or contact with an ecumenical organization is in itself a heresy. Such views are clearly exaggerations. Ecumenism is a heresy only if it actually involves the denial that Orthodoxy is the true Church of Christ. A few of the Orthodox leaders of the ecumenical movement have gone this far, but most Orthodox participants in the ecumenical movement have not said this much, and a few, such as the late Father George Florovsky, have only irritated the Protestants in the ecumenical movement by frequently stating at ecumenical gatherings that Orthodoxy is the Church of Christ. One must certainly criticize the participation of even these latter persons in the ecumenical movement, which at its best is misleading and vague about the nature of Christ's Church, but one cannot call such people heretics. Nor can one affirm that any but a few Orthodox representatives have actually taught ecumenism as a heresy. The battle for true orthodoxy in our times is not aided by such exaggerations. All the less, then, can one call Father Dimitry a heretic for his naive praise of a movement in which he has never himself participated. Thank you for listening. Please continue to Part 6.